I'm glad to welcome to the news desk now Anna Belak, Director, Office of Cyber Strategy at Sysdig. Anna, thanks for joining us on the Dark Reading News Desk.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Ahead of Black Hat, Sysdig Threat Research Team released its annual Cloud Threat Report. Can you share some of the major findings and maybe even some of the surprises that were there?
Absolutely. So we had probably two, well, we had a lot of findings, but the two that were most impactful to me would be the time of attacks in the cloud, so how quickly they happen. This is something that we've sort of been speculating about for a while. We've always assumed the attacks would be faster because there's so much opportunity for automation, programmability, like all the things that make cloud valuable to us are also easy to use for nefarious purposes. So now we have some substantial data showing that's actually true. So the average time between an attacker finds you through probably a public API or some public exposed asset to the time they're able to actually hurt you is something like 10 minutes on average, which is stunning. You know, like that's really fast.
Yeah, a little sobering.
Yeah. The reason for that, like I said, is partially the use of automation, right? So all of the infrastructure is code, everything is code, API access, programmability in general is what they're able to use, so they can cobble together essentially scripts and their own like automated attack systems to very quickly find good victims. And then actually they have scripts that will talk back, like send back a SMS essentially, or like a WhatsApp message to them when there's something worth pursuing. So if they see an interesting credential, then a human is signaled by the automated system and that person goes in to see what's going on. The other aspect is they're actually quite good at cloud. So we see very sophisticated maneuvers by the bad guys that indicate that they know what they're doing in terms of navigating the cloud control plane and where to look for common mistakes that the blue teams make.
Is this maybe a drawback to cloud's complexity because there's so many permutations that allow them entry?
Yeah, so exactly. One example is they abuse CloudFormation, right? So CloudFormation is how you provision things in AWS, for example. And the same is true for Terraform and other systems. But you can create policies in cloud that prevent folks from doing certain things from their accounts, right? But if you don't explicitly create those same policies for the CloudFormation way of doing the same thing, then it's allowed, right? So there are many little nuances in cloud where you may feel like or think that you blocked some activity, but you actually didn't because you didn't block like the 48 different ways of doing it.
Sure.
Yeah.
People are obviously at different stages of their journey with cloud. Talk about how cloud threats also impact an organization's on-prem environments. That membrane is maybe a lot thinner than we thought it was, yeah?
Yeah, this was something that I was always a little scared of because we have this kind of natural way of thinking that cloud is for innovation and then on-prem is for, you know, business critical, keeping the lights on, like, you know, legacy systems, if you will.
Right, you didn't hand over the keys of the kingdom to the cloud.
So if we're just doing like silly innovation stuff in the cloud, it's not a big deal if it gets compromised. We'll just shut it down, right? But obviously that's not really how it goes because everything's always connected. And so you may not know what you're doing in the cloud, or even if you know what you're doing in the cloud, you may not have full visibility into which secrets got accidentally left somewhere, or any possible array of things, how those two environments are connected. And so what we're seeing now is with pretty explicit evidence of attackers pivoting from the cloud control plane to the EC2 instances and vice versa, right? So one important element of cloud is that it's not just someone else's computer, so we can't just think, oh, it's a bunch of servers somewhere else. The control plane is a really important element that is where all your identity occurs, and that's where the attackers want to go so they can grab a privileged account, right? So pivots between control plane and the servers enables them sometimes to jump to the on-premise servers then because of the connectivity between the environments.
This sounds like a board of directors' biggest nightmare.
It's up there, yeah, and it's hard to know where those connections are, so you have to be very careful. And I don't have a great answer for what to do.
Yeah, sure, and who does, right?
Yeah.
There's an emerging school of thought that wants to treat cloud services, cloud services and containers similar to endpoints like hosts or employee workstations. Is this a good approach? Do other security concerns arise when you go that route?
Yeah, I'm gonna say it's not good, but I understand where folks are coming from. I think if you're really honest, you have to say that it's better than nothing, right? So if you're moving to cloud and you're using kind of endpoint cloud-centric ways of instrumenting for security, that's better than nothing. But when you're looking at ephemeral workloads, you're going to run into situations where either you can't install an agent or you don't have the resolution for the time scale. Like if a container lives 5 seconds, I mean, your hourly scan isn't going to help. So there are lots of moments like that, right? And then forensics is also hard because for something that appears and disappears very quickly, to know what exactly it did or how it did it, you may just not have the data. So we have to exceedingly think about having many different sources of data that we can very quickly stitch together. So this is something that's very important in kind of our world of CNAP is we want the cloud logs, we want the system calls, we want every piece of information we can get, and we want to, as quickly as possible, correlate them to each other so we can see when something really important is happening.
Can you talk a bit about why security teams are still so challenged with detecting and responding to threats in cloud environments?
To be fair, I think it's still hard on premise also.
Well, and we were talking a little bit ago about the complexity of cloud, so
Yeah.
there's that piece too, but what's up there?
Yeah. So the speed element I referenced earlier is important, right? So things are so fast.
Sure.
And there also is a lot of activity, right? The point of cloud is scalability. So we can do many things very quickly. I can scale my environment in minutes to thousands and thousands of instances. And so I also will see lots and lots of signals if something's going on those instances. So to know which of those are high fidelity, real, potentially incident indicators, and which of those are just noise is really hard. And also the attackers are having a much easier time finding you, right? So on premise, somebody has to be pretty deliberately looking for you to find your very specific data center or your very specific internal network. In cloud, like everything's a public API. So there are lots and lots of folks constantly scanning all those public APIs. They're constantly scanning GitHub repositories for secrets. They're like automatically looking for all these ways in. And so there are many more opportunities for the attackers to get in, and it's much harder for the defenders to see when something is serious and when something is just, business as usual.
Okay. Shifting gears, the shift left has become a bit of a kind of a marketing cliche and a management mantra, I think. This idea of starting earlier in the process, being a little bit more comprehensive up front as opposed to being reactive to security. It's a lot of cloud security vendors are also popularizing this idea of shift left. Sysdig takes a different approach with security and runtime. Talk about the contrast there and why Sysdig is going this route.
Sure. So shift left is amazing. I'm a full supporter of shift left, but it is A, a buzzword, and B, like the dirty secret, that's actually not a secret, is shift left is really, really hard. You can't just go to your teams, mandate shift left and be done with it, right? You're gonna build out continuous delivery systems, you're gonna build out all kinds of scanning tooling, you're gonna build out process for people to know what to do with the results of the scanning tooling, and this is gonna take years, maybe decades to get right? So it's not like you can just shift left, right? So one thing we have kind of said a few times is your first day of shifting left is actually the day you need shield right the most.
Okay.
Because you haven't shifted left yet, you just started building that kind of muscle, but you need to see what's going on in runtime because that's going to be your best signal today of whether or not you've been breached or whether or not something suspicious is going on. Our philosophy as a company is you need both, right? So we enable shift left with runtime insights. So we see what happens to systems in runtime so we can give you better view of what you should do on the remediation side when you actually are going to commit developer time to fixing something. And then we, of course, do runtime threat detection, and we see what actually happens when the system is running. Now, an interesting point from the threat report to that end, actually, is when we shift left, we do a lot of scanning, right? Usually static scanning of an artifact before that artifact is deployed into a production environment, which is great. We want that. But when we scanned Docker Hub for malicious images, we found a bunch of them that were certainly malicious, but looked perfectly safe until they were deployed. So once they're running, 10% of those malicious images, you could see that they were actually doing something weird. But until that point, you had no way of seeing that. So if you only did shift left, you would actually still be only like 90% okay on like pretty basic cloud malware, crypto miners, Tor nodes, all this stuff you don't want in your environment.
Great stuff, Anna. You've helped us really think differently about cloud security and some different ways in, and thanks for the great insights around shift left and runtime security. Thanks for joining us on Dark Reading News Desk today. We've been talking with Anna Belak of Sysdig, This has been Terry Sweeney for the Dark Reading News Desk.